4:50, and we are starting the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. We have a quorum with 11 members present. Councilmember Allen, Benedict, Gamble, Hurt, Mendez, Pulley, Sledge, Sorar, Syracuse, and Toombs. We will start with the resolutions on consent. I'll read the numbers first before reading the caption, and if anything needs to be pulled off, please let me know. RS 2023-2064, RS 2023-2066, 2067, 2070, 2071, 2072, 2073, 2074, 2075, 2077, 2078, 2079, 2080, and bills on consent, BL 2023-1744 and 1745. Does anything need to be pulled off of consent? All right, with that, I will start with the captions, starting with RS 2023-2064, O'Connell and Roden approves an electric utility easement agreement with the Electric Power Board of the Metropolitan Government. RS 2023-2066, Roden approves the terms of a cooperative purchasing master agreement for public utility equipment with the related accessories and supplies for the Department of General Services. RS 2023-2067 approves the First Amendment to an agreement between the Metropolitan Government and Azteca Systems LLC to provide enterprise license agreement for CityWorks software. RS 2023-2068 approves a statement of collaborative intent to Vanderbilt University. No, that one is not on consent. 2023-2070 is on consent. Approves an in-kind grant from the Centennial Park Conservancy to the Metro Board of Parks and Recreation to fund the purchase and installation of flooring in the Parthenon offices. Also on consent, RS 2023-2071 approves a grant from the Titans Foundation to the Metro Parks and Recreation Department to provide equipment, resources, and upgrades to the computer lab at the Luby Community Center. RS 2072 approves an in-kind grant from St. Bernard Academy to the Metro Board of Parks and Recreation for a portable stage, including stairs and skirting. RS 2023-2073 approves an in-kind grant from the Friends of Shelby Park and Bottoms to the Metro Board of Parks and Recreation for the purchase and installation of a boardwalk on the Shelby Park Events Lawn Loop. RS 2023-2074 approves Amendment 1 to a grant from the Friends of Warner Parks to the Metro Board of Parks and Recreation to provide seasonal staffing for the Special Work Education and Trails Program at Warner Parks. RS 2023-2075 approves an application for a Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equality Raise grant from the United States Department of Transportation to aid in the community outreach, planning, and design of the East Bank Boulevard and Greenway project. RS 2023-2077 authorizes the Metro Department of Law to compromise and settle the personal injury claim of Jeffrey Wilson against the Metropolitan Government for $27,700, with said amount to be paid out of the Self-Insured Liability Fund. RS 2023-2078 approves a memorandum of understanding between the Metropolitan Government and Housing Agency and the Department of Water and Sewage Services for sewer storm separation on the 2nd Street separation project. 2023-2079 approves Amendment 1 to a hazard mitigation grant from the Tennessee Department of Military, Tennessee Emergency Management Agency to the Department of Water and Sewage Services. 2023-2080 authorizes the Metro Department of Law to compromise and settle the personal injury claim of Haley Gunter against the Metropolitan Government for $60,000, with said amount to be paid out of the Self-Insured Liability Fund. Bills on consent on second reading. BL 2023-1744, O'Connell, Roden, Withers, and others approves a Greenway conservation easement for certain property located at 801 12th Avenue North, Nashville. BL 2023-1745 by Swope, Wooten, Withers, and others authorizes the Director of Public Property to donate to the State of Tennessee real property consisting of approximately 0.136 acres located at 6681 Nolensville Pike and 6655 Nolensville Pike for the use in construction at SR 11 US 31A, Nolensville Road from the south of Burkett Road near SR 254 Old Hickory Boulevard. May I have a motion for the consent agenda?
So moved.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any extensions? Abstentions? Thank you. All right, we'll go back to bills not on consent, or resolutions rather, not on consent, starting with RS 2023-2063 by Allen Welch, Hancock, and others, extends the provisions of Chapter 5.11 of the Metro Code as enacted under ordinance number BO 2021-972. May I have a motion?
Madam Vice Chair, I'd like to defer this one meeting, please.
Okay. Take any action, just defer it. All right, with that, we will move to defer this for one meeting. And there's no action needed for that. You do, okay. Yes, we do need to take a vote on that. All those in favor of the deferral of 2063 for one meeting?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, it passes. The second item on the agenda for discussion is RS 2023-2065 by Rodner Withers, approves an intergovernmental license agreement between the Metro Department of General Services and the Department of Safety and Homeland Security for parking spaces located at 5224 Hickory Hollow Parkway. May I have a motion?
Moved.
Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay. Councilmember Sledge, you're recognized.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Can somebody give a little bit of detail as to what Department of Safety and Homeland Security is going to be doing here?
Yes. Oh, yes, Mr. Hunter, Velvet Hunter is here with Homeland Security. Forgot which one.
Well, let's see. Thanks, John. Hi, I'm Velvet Hunter with the Metro Department of General Services. Yes, this is just an extension of an agreement that the state had with the previous owner of the Global Mall. It is for patrons and employees of DMV to utilize 50 parking spaces at that location.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Sarara.
Thank you. I think the question may have been answered. I was wondering if it was Global Mall and the impacts that it have on the current agreement that we have, if that was going to negatively impact it. But if it is an extension of something that was already there, I just want a confirmation that it doesn't disrupt whatever we agreed on with the Global Mall before with Vanderbilt. I see Mr. Jamison shaking his head. Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, with that, we're ready for a motion. Or ready for a vote. All those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, 11 in favor, 0 against. Next, we have on the agenda RS 2023-2068 by Roden and Benedict, approves a statement of collaborative intent to Vanderbilt University from the Metro Information Technology Services Department to a community in the loop approach to leveraging artificial intelligence for efficient and equitable response systems grant from the National Science Foundation to a pilot innovative technologies aimed to support Metro's emergency response capabilities. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Properly moved and seconded. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. Next, RS 2023-2069 by Roden and Syracuse approves a contract between the Metropolitan Government and ESI Acquisitions, Inc. to provide crisis information management systems. May I have a motion? Moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Councilmember Sarara.
Thank you, Chair. When I was looking at the detail, it says that this is a first-time contract, it's not an extension. And so my question is, what system were we using before? And why this is a sole source if we have something that we were using before? Just curious if someone can answer that.
Okay. Steve Martini is here. If you can go to the podium. Oh, well, we thought he was. Is anyone here?
We can get the answer before tomorrow, it's just clarification.
What was the question again?
This is a brand-new vendor for a system that helps us to report emergency services. Since this is EMS, we must be using something before. And I was just wondering why this is sole sourced and no other vendor.
They are the only vendor that can provide the service.
What were we using before, since this is our first time using them? What does he add to what we had before?
I don't believe this is the first time. This is extending the contract.
That's not what okay, we'll check on that. But he did say it was a first time.
No, my understanding is the contract, if it isn't extended, it will expire and then it will renew, and the renewal rates will be much higher.
Okay, all right, well, thank you.
Do you have anything on that? We'll look into it.
Please do.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we will go on and take a vote on this. All those in favor? Any opposed? All right, thank you. 11 in favor, 0 against. Let's see. I think that concludes everything not on consent. Okay, that concludes our agenda items except for number 20, where we will have a presentation from Director Flannery regarding the Tennessee Titans Stadium project. I think it's on.
Oversold, underdelivered. You don't get me today. But you do get a crew. I think we might need one more chair. But thank you, Vice Chair Gamble. If we think back to March 6th, I guess, when we filed legislation for the proposed stadium, we talked about the calendar and that in addition to the 2-meeting deferral, that we would continue to have conversations throughout that process. So this is the first one of those. Joining us today, we have our stadium negotiation financial, or not, I'm in finance land, legal counsel, and you've met Franklin Jones before, and joining him today is Dennis Bram. They're with Greenberg Trarg out of Houston. When I introduced them last time, I think you'll remember me saying that you are unlikely to find a professional sport that they have not been engaged in the negotiation on in the last decade, but almost every NFL transaction in the last several decades, they've either worked for the team or for the municipality. So we're really fortunate to have them on the team. On the head up there, that's good with me. And then Tom Cross with Metro Legal. And as always, Jeff Oldham with Bass, Berry & Sims, who is Metro and the Sports Authority's bond counsel. And as we talked about last week, we have, I think it's 15 exhibits within 2023-1741. And the intent for today is to walk through the high-level documents to both identify those things that we haven't talked about in grave detail from the term sheet to now, as well as to set the table for those things that will come in the finance plan discussion, which will be next Monday. Yeah, next Monday through a special meeting. And joining us for that meeting will be RCLCO, who has been our real estate development consultant working on some revenue assumptions around that. A firm that has been working on revenue assumptions around events and venues at the stadium. I'm sorry? Oh, sorry. And then the proposed underwriter, Goldman Sachs, who's been working on the data that's coming from the two revenue projection consultants and putting that into a structure that we think will be most beneficial to the Sports Authority and Metro. So with that, I think we're ready to go. Oh, can I just ask, this isn't a super long presentation, so it might just warrant running through the deck and then doing Q&A if I get to have a preference.
Yes, thank you.
I think it's on now. Good evening. I'm Jeff Oldham. As Director Flannery said, Bassbury and Sims, bond counsel to Metro and the Sports Authority, and I'll try to field questions as they come up. I'll run through these slides. They are short, and then I'll send questions as they come in to the right folks up here. She introduced Franklin Jones, Dennis Brammy, Tom Cross. So here's the sort of quick overview. And I think what we're trying to do here more than anything is, let me make sure it's these slides. Where are these? Oh, there we go. Done that slide. We just wanted to give you an overview of the transaction itself, maybe in a way that you hadn't seen it before. And as we think about this ordinance, in some ways, I think you can think about it breaking it down into three parts. There's a real estate transaction, and several of the documents relate to that real estate transaction. There's a development transaction, you're envisioning building a new building, and then there's an operations component, how that building's being operated over its life. And so we thought we'd sort of use that breakdown to sort of give you an overview and then sort of give you a sense of where all these documents fit in that framework. I've already been mocked roundly and probably fairly by the finance director for this square. That is intended to represent the campus on the East Bank. So use your creative juices. Currently, it's owned by the Sports Authority. I think it's 95 acres. Is that right, Tom? I think it is. So 100% is owned by the Sports Authority. 100% of the campus is encumbered by the current lease. And so you have the stadium sitting on it, surrounded by surface parking, all tied up as part of that lease. So if you want to think about the real estate transaction that's part and parcel of this ordinance, it's got several steps. The first step would be to amend the existing lease to reduce its size so that rather than it being the entire campus, it would be the existing building itself and the immediate surrounding area. Really, if you think of the four streets there, I think I'm gonna get these right, Russell, Second, Victory, and Titans Way is the square. That becomes the existing site that's encumbered by the current lease. Step two then would have the Sports Authority conveying the balance of the campus, everything other than the existing site, to Metro. Step three, if the new stadium transaction is pursued, would have Metro ground leasing the site of the new stadium, and that's roughly where it is on the site. Ground leasing that site back to the Sports Authority. If you want to think about it as a precedent, Geodis Park is owned by Metro through the Fair Board, ground lease to the Sports Authority in the same sort of way. And so you would have that arrangement for the existing site. The next step is the Sports Authority, and all this, by the way, would happen at once. The Sports Authority would convey to Metro an option to purchase the existing site when the existing lease is over. That's the next step. So then as that plays out, the new stadium's built, the old stadium's torn down, and that existing lease expires. The entire campus is owned by Metro. The portion in green, the new stadium site, is ground leased to the authority, still owned by Metro. And so the documents you see in your package, you'll see an option agreement. We've sort of hit on that. You'll see a ground lease. That's in one of the exhibits. And the last of the relevant documents is a site coordination agreement. And the site coordination agreement is the agreement by which Metro and the authority and Stadco agree as to how the campus is going to interact with the stadium and vice versa. That's what's going on. And so that's the real estate piece of it. And the driving force, behind all this is sort of, I think, what you guys have envisioned from the start, which is Metro is going to oversee the development of this campus. That's one of the key components coming out of this transaction. So this real estate piece of it and those documents are intended to accomplish that. Then let's go now to a little busier slide, the stadium development piece. So, we're not talking now about the operation of the stadium. This is just how is it getting built. And so we'll just start, let's start maybe at sort of between 11 and 2 o'clock on the clock. And, Metro and the Sports Authority, we've talked about the ground lease already. You have an intergovernmental agreement in your package where Metro would agree to provide specified revenue sources to the Sports Authority to enable the Sports Authority to issue 760 bonds sufficient to generate a $760 million contribution to a construction fund. I think this should all sound familiar to you, but this is what's going on. The Sports Authority would enter into a development agreement with Stadco. That's an agreement between the Sports Authority and Stadco, but it's exhibited to your ordinance. So you've got that in your package. Stadco's responsibility is to, and we're going to get to the other contributions here in a minute, is to fund the balance of stadium costs, whatever they are, over and above the other contributions. So if we continue on around the clock, there is a state funding agreement between the Sports Authority and the state. Its primary purpose is to sort of memorialize the state's obligation to put $500 million into the deal. Continuing around the clock, there's a PSL agreement that will be distributed, I think, in maybe the next 48 hours to everybody, still undergoing a few final touches. That agreement will result in the contribution of PSL sales revenues to the construction fund. So going back to Stadco at 4 o'clock on the clock, 760 from the Sports Authority, the PSL contribution, 500 million from the state, the remaining of the project budget, whatever it is, coupled with cost overruns, is the responsibility of Stadco under the development agreement. And then going over the top right-hand side, you've got a guarantee in your, as an exhibit to the ordinance. It does a couple of things. One of the things it does is it has Tennessee Football Inc. This is the franchise holding organization. It has them guaranteeing the obligations of Stadco, which is sort of the stadium operating company, under the development agreement. So that's what's happening on the development, the sort of second big piece of this transaction. The third piece is the operations itself. So now at this point, the stadium's built. How is it operated? Again, Metro's ground leasing the site. There's an intergovernmental agreement. The stadium lease has some, there are several funds that Metro Finance Department's obligated to hold. The intergovernmental agreement speaks to Metro's obligation to do that. Then there is a structure underneath the Sports Authority that looks a lot like the existing structure, just in terms of the documents. There's a stadium lease again with Stadco. Stadco would sublease the stadium to the team. That's sort of exactly how it's currently set up. There's a team contract right now between the Stadco for the existing stadium, similar structure. One sort of technical difference in this new structure is where the Sports Authority has a three-way lease agreement between the Sports Authority, Stadco, and TSU with respect to the existing stadium. There would just be a sublease from Stadco to TSU. And then just like with the development agreement, the franchise holding entity is going to guarantee the obligations of Stadco under the lease and enter into a non-relocation agreement where, sort of long story short, don't relocate the team, play all your home games at the stadium. That's what the non-relocation agreement says. And that's an agreement that comes directly from the franchise holding entity rather than from Stadco. So that's sort of the overview of the transaction, just sort of a super high level transaction schedule. As you know, all of these documents are up for this body's approval and the Sports Authority's approval in the next March and April. Should you elect to proceed, the Sports Authority would need to come back in the ensuing months and adopt a bond resolution to specifically authorize the bonds. And then as we envision it, all the transaction documents that you've just heard described, from the real estate documents, the development documents, the lease documents, and the issuance of bonds would all be executed, delivered at the same time. So that's a hopefully quick overview of what you have in front of you. And rather than go through with sort of line by line, we thought maybe it'd be a better use of your time to now open it up for Q&A. And these guys, particularly from Greenberg, are here. I hope you'll take advantage of them, and we'll send as many questions their way as possible.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. We'll open it up for questions now. Councilmember Allen, you're recognized.
Thank you. Just a question about the bonds. What is the duration of the bonds? Are they 20 or 30-year bonds?
So I'm gonna defer to the financier. I know the answer, but I don't want to steal her thunder.
Okay.
Thank you. The expectation is they would be 30 years. I'm going to say it's probably a lot. The financing plan will be presented next Monday, and I know that's not going to scratch a lot of itches, but I want to reiterate what Mr. Oldham said about taking advantage of who's in the room right now. And you have two of the four, but specifically two preeminent experts that are from out of town that have worked on professional sports negotiations for their entire career. So this is an opportunity not just to go into the weeds of what's in these documents, but to pick brains on concepts. And does this look like something you've seen? Does it not? I'm not trying to feed you questions, but yes, the duration of the bonds, GO would be 20. Whenever we do enterprise or revenue fund debt, we typically go 30 years.
So my follow-up to that, thank you for that answer. The non-relocation is a 20-year obligation, it looks like, if I'm understanding it right. So can you explain that to me?
Practice facilities versus.
Yeah, so there are kind of two components to that. The primary non-relocation agreement runs the entire term of the lease. So the relocation term is the same. Now, there is a 20-year agreement in there about the practice facility and the headquarters, where the team has agreed not to move those for 20 years, but that is different from the playing the games in the stadium and keeping the team in Nashville.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Benedict, you're recognized.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Excuse me. Please bear with me. I've had a throat situation here, so might be a little gravelly. I've got a lot of questions. I kind of got stuck in Exhibit A when I started looking at the documents. Just the third paragraph. The business terms are absolutely important. I mean, that's what we're about, right? But at the same time, 30 years from now, we're going to be looking at a document that, much like we're looking back at a document now, saying, why was that in there? So I'm just going to kick it off with one clause that I find unnecessary, which is, so it says, whereas pursuant to the terms of the existing lease, the authority is liable for the cost to repair and maintain the existing stadium in a first-class condition, and neither the authority nor the Metropolitan government has sufficient funds apart from the Metropolitan government's general fund to satisfy this liability. And I don't see that to be a necessary statement to put into a legal agreement. We know why we're here. We actually are here for many more reasons potentially than what's in that paragraph. Why do we need that paragraph in this legal agreement?
Fair enough.
Can we strike it?
Certainly don't have any problem with that.
Thank you. So I think that those are the kinds of things that as we go through this body would like to be able to look at potentially every single paragraph. I mean, I don't want to come back from now 30 years from now and say, boy, how embarrassing we were in this legal agreement just with our, hand in our hat. just, or hat in hand, you know, going, oh man, we just need to get this deal done. Well, we don't need to get this deal done. We've got time to do this deal and get it done right and go through every paragraph if we need to go through every paragraph. Can we, on the transaction schedule, I'm glad that slide is still up. I just want to confirm that should this bill be deferred, each one of those can be deferred as well. That's a desired transaction schedule, is that right?
They could be deferred.
Thank you. That's what I've got right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Mendez.
Probably no surprise, I have a few questions, and I'm happy to wait for other folks to go first. Anybody else wants to? All right. So I have sent some comments to Tom Cross and Jeff Oldham, and I'm not going to go through all of them. There's some stuff that is less technical legalese and more big picture issues that I want to make sure there's some public discussion of. And I'm just going to go in order what I have here. I appreciate that we're going to get the personal seat license agreement. Is that going to then be made an exhibit to one of these things, so it's actually part of the legislation we approve?
It certainly can be.
All right, I would like it if it can be, just so we can have that out there. There are some agreements from the 1996 deal that I haven't been able to locate in any sort of public way. So I think just for being able to follow the breadcrumbs a couple decades in the future, I think we should try to get all the material agreements as part of this legislation. Another item from the development agreement, it talks about the minority participation goal being set at a later time. And I'm wondering if there's a reason why we couldn't get the minority participation goal set forth in the agreements.
The agreements call for the procurement of design and construction services to be done the same way as if Metro's own rules apply, even though the team is going to be doing the procuring of those services. And ordinarily, that process would require the business assistance office in purchasing to help figure out what appropriate goals there are, based in part on things like the availability within the community and utilization rates and things like that.
Well, I raise it just because I know I've got colleagues who may be interested in that, and they might want to follow up with you offline about that. I'm going to save the lease for last and flip to the site coordination agreement. You know, this is in the weeds, but gambling is addressed in the site coordination agreement. And as I understand the agreement, it basically says if the state legalizes gambling in the future, the STADCO, the team would have, and this is at 8.5C Romanet 2, that the team would have the discretion about whether to implement gambling in the stadium. I'd like to make sure I'm understanding that correctly, that if the state legalizes gambling, it's up to the team whether the stadium can be used for gambling.
Councilmember Mendez, I think this falls into the category of the fact that the site coordination agreement is not, while it's final in its current state, it's not final as to all the developed terms of that agreement. And that agreement, when it's finalized, in all of its detail, will come back to this body for approval. So you'll have the opportunity to look at each and every one of those provisions. It's a very complex agreement because it tries to balance the interests of Metro with respect to how it maximizes the campus for the neighborhood and for the citizens of Nashville, along with the interests of the team in maximizing their opportunities within the stadium and activating the surrounding area when they are holding events at the stadium. So those are going to be one of the issues that we're going to be looking at in depth.
All right, and one of the things I'll request is, I understand that and appreciate that, but let's have the default be there ain't no there's no casino usage for the stadium absent Metro Council approval. That's the default, not the current language where it looks like the team could exercise that discretion if the state legalized it. Similarly, with the TSU lease, I get the idea that the structure's being shifted around. I think the body would probably like some comfort from TSU that before we approve this, that they're comfortable. Because right now, it basically is it's a promise to work something out for the team to work something out with TSU later. And I'm guessing we've got some folks that will want some comfort from TSU that that's not a shot in the dark, but something reliable that it's going to happen. Then moving to the non-relocation agreement, I noticed that starts after the stadium is built. And help me understand why that wouldn't start now when we approve the deal as opposed to the way it's drafted to start when the stadium is built.
Well, right now, the team is operating under the current lease and those provisions. The non-relocation agreement is strictly tied to the new building. So it is, when they have occupancy and use of the building, they're required to not only play their games here, but also stay here during the term of the lease. So that's the way it was negotiated. That's a pretty common practice. They very seldom, I've never seen one that started before the term of the lease agreement.
Seems like it should start around about the time we issue the bonds. But I hear what you're saying. On the stadium funding, the state funding agreement, I want to make sure everybody understands that, especially given our current relationship between the city and the state, there's a cap on damages if the state were to be in default of the agreement somehow at $300,000. That's the typical cap on liability in a contract with the state. So that, I'm not really looking for comment, I'm just mentioning that. For the lease, a couple of things I want to make sure I understand right. The standard for how the stadium has to be kept up, it's a defined term, comparable NFL facilities. And it's a long definition, but I'm basically understanding that to mean at any given time, it's the then NFL current standard, as opposed to now where the standard is basically look at stadiums 10 years plus or minus the construction date of our current stadium. Going forward, the standard for a comparable NFL facility, if it's 2037, the standard is whatever the NFL standard facility is in 2037. Am I understanding that right?
Well, it's, well, the way it reads now, it is, we use 3 stadiums as comparable because they're the latest 3 that were built. So it would be those 3 stadiums, including any improvements made to those stadiums in the future, any changes in NFL rules that provide changes and improvements in stadiums. So it would be an ongoing standard that should increase in time as improvements are made in stadium development and stadium improvements at those 3 facilities.
Yeah, and that's the key thing I want to make sure I understood. It identifies some recently built stadiums, but then that standard is adjusted to however those stadiums have been upgraded over time.
Yes.
And so in 2040, we won't be looking at what those buildings were like in 2023. We're going to be looking at what those buildings are like in 2040.
Exactly.
All right. And then there's going to be an annual report prepared by a consultant hired by the team, approved by the Sports Authority, called a CAMP report, Capital Asset Management Plan. And there's a list in section 6.2C of things that report has to include, but among what it has to include is everything that needs to be done to keep the new stadium up to, quote, comparable NFL facilities.
That's correct. And it'll be done every 3 years, not every year.
Okay.
But that's correct.
And then the team is, there's a weird word in there where it says the team has to undertake not build, do, keep up, et cetera. It's, the team has to undertake to do the things in the camp report. And I guess it's just a curious use of undertake. Why would that be instead of say the team shall make the improvements?
I wish I had a great answer for that. It is maybe not the best word choice, but that is the intent, that the team is obligated to implement, make all the improvements, make all the repairs that are identified in the camp report. That is the intent.
And then that obligation to undertake those things is qualified by a phrase that says, unless changed circumstances warrant another timeline. And that's not a defined thing. So what are the sorts of things that are meant by unless changed circumstances warrant a different timeline?
Well, one thing I can think of is just force majeure, something that happens that prevents them from undertaking, and I'm using the word I shouldn't, something that prevents them from making the improvements or repairs, or especially if they're construction related. Something happens that prevents them from doing that temporarily. It just it pushes back the timeline, but it doesn't eliminate it.
And do you think that if the state of Tennessee cut back or eliminated some of the dedicated revenue sources, that would constitute changed circumstances warranting another timeline?
Well, the team is obligated to do these things whether there's a funding source or not. I mean, there is funding mechanism in here to help keep the building up, but any shortfalls in those accounts that are set up in the lease, the team is obligated to fill those in. So I'm not to make a policy call, but they are obligated to do anything above what is currently being filled in those accounts.
So I know you guys are the preeminent expert on this, but to me, with the way section 9.12 is clear that the revenue sources as currently known are a quote material inducement to the team to do the deal. With language in there being where everybody's apparently agreeing that the existence of those revenue sources are a material inducement to the team, it seems like getting rid of the material inducement, killing off the revenue sources, limiting the revenue sources, the team would certainly argue at that time was a changed circumstance. And if that's not the intent, it would seem like language should be added to make sure it expressly says that the reduction or elimination of those revenue sources is not a default of a material term and does not constitute changed circumstances that warrant another timeline.
Understood.
I will say section 9.12 is intended not so much for that, but to memorialize the constitutional contracts clause claim that's present throughout this document. And that is that once the state has enabled a revenue stream that is then pledged or contractually committed to a third party, the state can't then back up on that
Yeah.
enabling of revenue streams.
I hear you on that, but you know, if we end up with hundreds of millions of dollars at stake in the future, the fact that the default provision at 8.1B Romanet 2, where it's a default for if there's a breach of a quote material term using the word material, and 9.12 talks about those revenue sources being quote a material inducement, like without express language that the reduction of those revenue sources does not constitute a default and does not constitute changed circumstances that would warrant another timeline, I feel like this ends up being open for debate a couple of years down the road if there's not additional language added. And then my last point that I was going to just mention was the same thing that Councilmember Allen did about not exactly clear why the limitation on the headquarters and practice field to stay in Davidson County would only be 20 years. I mean, I assume it was a negotiated point, and maybe it's a question for the team about why they'd want to be able to leave the county after 20 years for their headquarters and their practice field.
I don't want to answer for them, but I heard the answer this morning. Am I okay to repeat it? And they can certainly, what they said at the Sports Authority meeting today is they have just improved their headquarter facilities there. They're pretty landlocked. They have no idea what their land needs as a practice facility might be in the future. And at the end of 20 years, they may have sort of run the life cycle of this current facility and could be in a box if they don't have access to additional land. And as a result, we're willing to make the commitment for 20 years. That's how that, and again, I don't want to speak for them. I'm just in a spirit of being efficient here. That's what we heard this morning.
All right, I hear you on that. And you guys have already got my more technical comments, and so I won't go through those right now.
Thank you. Before we get to Councilmember Hurd, I do have a couple of questions to follow up to Councilmember Mendez. On the stadium development slide, you all show the contribution for, thank you for going back to that, for the ground lease. And then you show the PSL and the stated Statco funding, but you don't have an amount. Do you have, I remember in earlier conversations about the term sheet, there was an amount. Do you have an estimated amount that we talked about before? Has that changed? And what is it?
So let me, no, that's a good question. So let me sort of go that the other way, and Frank, I'll invite you to jump in here. I think the one point I would make is that balance number will be determined when the guaranteed max price contract is in hand, and then we know what the project budget is to the dollar.
Do you have an estimate?
So then I was going to go backwards. I think the term sheet, I just don't want to quote the wrong number. I'm sure, I think the term sheet said 2.2 billion. And so if you want to, for whatever that number's worth, take the term sheet then as gospel, you could then back up into, back the 2.2 billion, back out 760 million, back out 500 million, put in whatever you think might come in from PSLs, and the balance would be Stadco's obligation plus any cost overruns above 2.2 billion. If that number goes up, if it goes down, that balance adjusts accordingly.
Do you have an estimate for what the PSL dollars will bring in?
I would leave that one to the team.
Could anyone speak to that from the team?
Good evening, Burke Nihil, President and CEO of the Titans and Nissan Stadium. The answer is not yet. To Mr. Oldham's point, the team is committed to delivering the balance based on the current numbers. That's $800+ million. We have engaged multiple consultants to help us understand all of the factors involved in getting to a PSL number. We've told our current PSL holders that we will be issuing them a credit equal to 100% of the value of their PSL the year in which they purchased it. So there's a lot of factors and variables. The NFL has supported our being able to deliver on that final number required to get to construction funding, regardless of what that PSL number is. But it's frankly requires more research than we have in-house. And we've just started to do some of that work. But we do not have a final number to share today.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
My next question has to do with the TSU sublease. In initial conversations about the term sheet, it was discussed that TSU would not have to pay for the use of the stadium. Has that changed?
No.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilmember Hurd, you're recognized. Oh, wait a minute. Okay.
You might want to come back to the mic. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions, and one, and like you, was about the PSL. because I happen to be a PSL holder, and I don't know, you can tell me if my contract is, that I didn't read it clearly, but I thought it had guaranteed me my PSL seat for life, as long as there were a Tennessee Titans team, not to the expiration of there no longer being a stadium.
No, PSL contracts apply to the stadium itself, not to the team. Throughout the NFL, PSL contracts all work differently. I don't know of any, and perhaps these gentlemen would have some insight, but I don't know of any that would tie to an actual team as opposed to a stadium, or in many cases, actually just a term of years.
I would just add, being a PSL holder myself in Houston, that for various teams, that they don't really follow the team to the new stadium or the new arena. And it's pretty common practice that if a team is moving to a new facility, they have to be relicensed at that new facility. That's pretty common practice. I'm not sure what your specific contract says, but that's very, very common.
Well, I mean, my contract was with the Tennessee Titans. It wasn't with the Kansas City Chiefs if they decide to move here. So, so I guess the concern would be is that we need to make it clear that if this does happen and we are 30 years down the road or 20 years down the road again, that people won't be believing or thinking that money is going towards this professional team that's here in Nashville, regardless of who the team is. So I'm not sure if that was actually clear, because I thought it was with the Tennessee Titans. So that's just a note. And the other thing is, did I hear you correctly when you said that that bonds would be released perhaps before the lease was actually effected?
No, good question. So, and for reference, if you want to look at section 3.3 of the development agreement, it's some provisions I think are more important than others. This is a pretty good one. And it is a laundry list of everything that has to be done before bonds can be issued. And the first sub-bullet is each of the project documents. And by the way, somebody had asked about the TSU lease earlier, which I'm all forgetting. We can't issue bonds until the TSU lease has been done. I mean, so all the project documents that you saw described on the screen, the TSU lease, and the existing stadium amendments, which are amendments to the existing lease, which we described, and also an amendment to the existing TSU lease. So everybody's got to come to the table. No obligation until it's all been signed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Benedict.
Thank you, Vice Chair. A comment earlier was about the final documents when you were having an exchange with Councilmember Mendez. You said something about, and this was, I'm thinking it was Exhibit K that he was looking at. You said something to the effect of that there will be further clarification via a document in the future that will need to come back before this body. So that leads me to believe that what we're being asked to approve right now isn't in its final form.
I think that the documents before you are in pretty well in their final form. There might be a T to cross or an I to dot, but what I was specifically referring to is the site coordination agreement contemplates that there will be a fairly robust set of restrictions that will be developed between Metro and the Stadco as to how the overall campus will work and interact and be activated. And for that to happen, Metro has to first select a master developer who would come in and be part of those discussions to balance the interests of Metro, the neighborhood, the team and the master developer. So in that sense, there will be additional documentation coming back to approve, but it will really relate to the entire activation of the campus outside of the stadium.
Thank you. And for the specifics about that particular agreement, I was more concerned along the lines of final documents versus draft documents. I view this as a draft, and I think you guys have done a phenomenal job as a draft document. But to me, you've now brought a document to the legislative body for us to further refine and make better, right? Our job is to make it as good as possible. We're the body that's closest to the voters. So when I ask if it's a final document, I'm asking for that reason, as well as just overall that this is a draft. Do we know the penalty for the non-relocation agreement?
Sure. So there are a couple of things that can happen if the team does breach the non-relocation agreement. The primary thing that we would want is specific performance. We want to go to court and force them to stay and fulfill their obligation throughout the lease term. So that would be number one, get injunctive relief and force them to stay here. If you lose at that point, then there are certain liquidated damages that the team would have to pay to leave early. And they basically are tied to the public contribution that is being made to build the stadium. So in the agreement, there are kind of three columns that we look at. One column deals with the funds that are set up: the maintenance and repair fund, capital improvement fund, the special project. What do we call that? Eligible projects fund. So all the public money all the money that goes into those funds that has been spent over up to the point of the breach gets reimbursed. You get that money back. The second column just deals with the state and authority contribution, $500 million, $760 million. You get that money back. And the third column deals with if you decide you want to repurpose the site and you want to tear the stadium down so you have the whole campus to develop, then they have to pay the reasonable cost of tearing down the stadium, backfilling it, making it a usable site. Now, the NFL does require, if you have liquidated damages, at some point they work themselves down to zero. What we were able to do is keep the drop off from happening till later in the term. So for example, with column A, it starts after the year 15 of the lease. So that stays whole until year 15, then it drops down by about 6.25% or something like that. For the stadium debt that is entered into, that stays whole until year 11. And then it starts to drop down by 5%, working its way to zero. And column 3 just stays the same, whatever the cost is to tear down the stadium and backfill it with clean dirt and level it off, that stays the same. So it is a pretty substantial penalty. It's one you probably hope to never levy because you want the team to stay. But if they do elect to do something differently, we think it's a pretty substantial, I don't want to call it a penalty. It is just it's a damage claim that you have to make them pay if they decide to move.
Okay. Early on, we talked about this, and I think it became something we stopped talking about. But since you're experts in the field, I'm really curious what your opinion is on this. The value of a team prior to a new stadium renovation versus after a new stadium renovation. The valuation of a team is like I'm in real estate. I'm a residential realtor. Zillow says my house is worth $700,000. If I were to put it on the market today, it's worth $500,000, right? So evaluation is what evaluation is. It's what somebody says it is. Now, should be an educated guess. I would hope Zillow is a little bit closer on mine. But I'm not living in a $700,000 house for what it's worth. Anyway, the value of the team, it's known that the past few teams that have gotten a new stadium, the value of the team has increased tremendously, sometimes by a factor of 6. That revenue then stays with the NFL and with the team, even though the city or the municipality has taken on an obligation, a risk. They're not getting the reward that the team's taking on a risk, but they're getting the reward. Do you believe that it's fair for taxpayers to be able to to split that award, that they should be able to split that as it was the result of the risk that they take. What's your opinion on that?
I'll let my seasoned colleague answer that first.
It's a really good question, and from the public's perspective, certainly a very fair one. I am not aware of any sports stadium or arena transaction that's been done where really there was a sharing of appreciation of value between the team as a private entity and a municipality to help facilitate
So
that
we
kind of
could
transaction.
set a precedent, in other words.
I doubt that the NFL would approve it. And I doubt that any other league would approve it. It would be extremely difficult. There is a case that recently occurred down in Florida, in Miami, where there was a dispute over such a situation. It's the only time I've ever seen that happen. It led to significant litigation. But in my experience, I've been doing these transactions for 40 years. I've never seen the league agree to allow a team to share its asset value. And you have to kind of look at this kind of on balance between what you're getting and what you're being, what the team is taking on in lieu of you taking it on. You have a facility now where you have tremendous liability. You're exchanging that for a reallocation of risk of that liability to the team, and at the same time, getting a state-of-the-art facility that they've agreed to maintain and take the risk on for the balance of the term of the lease. I think in the introduction, it was mentioned I represent teams as well as municipalities. So I've seen it from both sides. You asked my opinion, and my opinion is it would be highly unusual and probably dead on arrival, if I may suggest to the team that they share their asset value with the municipality. I don't think it would ever happen.
And we could have an academic conversation. I think about this and I love it. Although I know we have a lot of people here who wouldn't want to listen to us have that. I think the taxpayers deserve to benefit, right? And so one thing from a procurement side of things, and maybe Director Flannery, you'll be able to answer this, but when we do an RFP for stuff, do we make folks who respond to that RFP provide financial information about their company? Publicly traded companies in particular, but revenue, losses, any lawsuits that they're currently involved in, typical RFP questions.
Yeah, sorry. My colleague Macy is confirming lawsuits, yes. I'm trying to think of any scenario where we would require a balance sheet. When we in finance solicit, as part of our debt management policy, we have a whole process on how we engage underwriters and we qualify a pool. For that, we ask for their capital position, but that's because they're taking on the debt of the city, so their capital position very much matters. But outside of that kind of work, I can't think of a case where we would necessitate the need to see a balance sheet of a corporate partner.
What's the type of dollar amount risk with that in that particular that you're talking about?
So for the deal we're contemplating here, we're talking about 760.
I didn't know if there was something that you were referencing. Otherwise,
So when we sell bonds for any, whether it's the CIB, water, sewer, for this transaction, it's $760 million. And it's not, Kelly going out and selling it. It's going to be Goldman Sachs selling it. And if it doesn't sell, they commit to taking it. So they have a takedown. And so when we enter into that engagement with them, because, we sell bonds, it's like a 1 hour window, right? When we're going out and selling them, we do all of this for what is eventually 1 hour of work. They take on that liability. So if they can't find a buyer, they commit to us, we will buy those bonds. So that's why seeing their capital position is very important. We need to know they have the money if they can't sell them.
Thank you for that. And so taking that analogy, and I'm glad this development slide's still up, if Tennessee Football Inc. if Teamco is the guarantor, right? Do we have their financials? We have the team's financials to know that they can back this?
No, we do not. And the NFL by their rules, does not allow their teams to give out their financials information. But to kind of piggyback on what Ms. Flannery was talking about. This deal does require, again, before the funding releasing date. So before you put your money into the deal, the state does. Stadco has to prove to us, meaning the legal team, the financial department, and the financial advisors, that they have the ability to make their contribution to the stadium. So we get to view their term sheets for their financing. We get to view the final product, make sure that they are able to do what they've promised to do. So we will not see their financial statements, but we will see the agreements that they enter into to make the commitments to pay whatever the Stadco contribution ends up being at the time of the funding date. So it's not a review of their audited financial statements, but we do get to see how they plan on making their contribution and what the commitments are from banks or in the NFL and whoever else is providing that financing to them before we contribute our money.
So just thinking about, I mean, the Titans know that I respect and love our Titans. So anytime that I'm saying things in the negative like this, it's for hypothetical purposes. So hypothetically, I want to go back to what we're talking about here in regards to the financials. So Bernie Madoff, people thought that he could back their investments. And the SEC came and looked and said, yep, he's good, right? They didn't look well enough. We're going to look harder, right? But who's to say, if we can't verify this for the taxpayer, who's to say that it's okay? Well, it's up to us to say. But how can I tell a taxpayer that what I'm asking someone to back, that they can back, when they won't be transparent with me and tell me what it is that they're making already or what they have available? I guess from a, as we're working on this as a team in this draft agreement, what can we add in here to put some teeth in this to make sure that the taxpayers know that they're not going to end up in a position 30 years from now where somebody wants to, put something in a contract saying that the city has not done a good job, right? Like, I don't ever want to be in this position again. I don't ever want to have my head down looking at the second paragraph of a contract, right? I want to walk into this as a winner for everybody. And so that's what I'm hoping that together we can all get to. How can we make this great for those folks? How can we add things like, if you want us to take on this risk, we need to know a little more from you. So I would say, I would really push back on, this is a significant financial incentive. If there's people that do business with Metro and we require more information from them for less money, then why can't we get that same information on a much larger deal? That's all. I'm just looking for, that's it. And that's all I've got, Chair.
Thank you. Go on.
Let me also point out, so back to the document, the development agreement, this section, same section 3.3, which outlines the laundry list of conditions, sorry, that have to be met before bonds can be issued. Just a couple of them. One is Stadco displays sufficient evidence of its capacity to fund the contribution amount and the cost overrun amount, including without limitation, getting an NFL G4 facility, which I don't speak that language. That's the typical NFL stadium financing loan commitment, and requisite NFL approvals, a commitment letter from a lender for all or a portion of the Stadco amount, or if that's not possible, a highly confident letter from a lender, term sheets for any financing, including with the Stadco source of funds. And then before money can actually be released, Stadco is delivered to the authority for review by the authority's legal counsel and financial advisors, final financing agreements related to any Stadco financing agreement, any PSL relating financing agreement, and confirmation assurance is reasonably acceptable to the authority that Stadco has the financial resources available to fund the cost overrun amount. So as a really good question, and as you read back through section 3.3, those, I think a lot of those provisions there are a lot of those checks in there. Right.
All right, I know, Chair.
Yeah, no.
Stadco is what you just read through, and it was
Fair enough,
Stadco, and the slide says Teamco. So if the contract says Stadco, but we're saying Teamco's the backstop, then we
That's-
need the document to reflect the
We've got that
Teamco.
same- That's right. And
Okay.
go ahead.
Well, and we have a guarantee from Teamco to backstop all of Stadco's
Okay,
obligations.
There we
So
go.
that's in the guarantee agreement.
good, okay.
And one thing I will add that the conditions in the development agreement are pretty robust, and I think they exceed anything we've drafted before. I mean, and a lot of that credit is to the Metro team. These conditions before issuing bonds are pretty strenuous, and then the further conditions before actually providing the money to the project are even more strenuous. So I think there is sufficient coverage here for the public to feel comfortable when they finally put in the money to build the building, that a lot of checks and balances have happened before the public has committed their funds.
Can I just add that that commitment letter shouldn't be underestimated. That's not just a piece of paper from a bank. That is an outlay of cash from the team. And I'm not in corporate banking, and they can speak better to what it will cost them, but it will be in the magnitude of millions of dollars to get that commitment letter. So, and they don't get it back if we don't move forward. So that is evidence of a commitment, not just from the bank, but from the team to move forward.
You good, Councilmember
I have
Benedict?
a follow-up, but I'm blanking on it. I know you'll be kind to me.
Thank you. Councilmember Mendez.
Thanks. Just on the guarantee questions that Councilmember Benedict was asking, one of the things that struck me about the guarantee, and it made me think you guys probably know something I don't know, so I'll go ahead and ask it. It struck me as odd that there wasn't a rep and warranty anywhere, that Teamco actually owns the team. And so I'm assuming you guys know somehow that we don't currently know that Teamco actually owns all the team.
No, actually, I think that was a good catch by you, and we will make that fix.
All right. And in addition to the rep and warranty, I assume they can like show you something to show that that's actually
Because we own the
true.
team. Yes, they can.
All right. And then the other thing that the back and forth with Councilmember Benedict made me remember, somehow I got over here without all my notes, so doing some of this from memory. If memory serves, the part that you all were talking about in the development agreement, the very robust conditions to issue the bonds, and then a further set of conditions to before the project's actually funded. Anytime this happens, somebody has to be the last person who can say no to the deal. And my understanding of the agreement, the development agreement, is the team's the last party that can say no to going forward, even after bonds are issued and we're sitting with $760 million. The team at that point could decline to fund, and they would have to pay back issuance costs to Metro, so it would come with a stick. But am I understanding that correctly, that the team is the last that can say no even after the bonds have been issued?
I think that's fair. One more stick, and really a bigger stick that's in there is if you never hit the funding release date, the defined term, and you said it correctly, the bonds have to be redeemed to the extent that there's any cost, the money's still sitting there from bond proceeds isn't sufficient to pay the bonds off. They've got to pay that. The other thing that happens is, and this is really the bigger stick, is the existing lease, when everything unwinds, all the documents go back to square one with one exception, and that is the existing lease goes back to a reduced capital expense requirement. We spent a lot of time talking about the existing lease has a good condition requirement and then a comparable facilities requirement. If they're the last to say no, and they do say no, when it goes back to that lease, that comparable facilities requirement goes away. And the existing lease is back down to good condition.
Of course, that's a fast track to I mean, right now the lease ends in a couple of years because the option hasn't been exercised.
But I'm just making the point about
The extra
following
hammer.
that all the way
Yeah.
through. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Benedict?
Thank you, I remembered it. So because we've got two experts here, would you do this deal now, or would you wait until we're a little closer to the end of the contract?
I would absolutely do it now.
Can you explain now as compared, I know I asked you a yes or no question.
Yeah.
A follow-up.
It immediately resolves potential liabilities for Metro under the existing lease and resolves those issues and puts both Metro and the team in a much better place. And I'm a believer in the possibility of intervening events. And when you delay a transaction, and you said that you're in real estate, so you know if you delay a transaction, things happen that you weren't expecting. It's better to get them done when all the parties are in concert and agreement to get something done that's good for both sides.
Hopefully we can reach concert and agreement. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any more questions or comments? Great. Thank you, Mr. Jones, Braham, Cross, and Odom for being here. Thank you, Director Flannery, for bringing this presentation to the Budget Committee. Do you have any final comments, Director Flannery?
No, we did receive, I'm B. Jameson for a second. We did receive the latest batch of questions, and we're working our way through them. And I think I'm happy to report a lot of them we plan on addressing on Mondays, but keep them coming if you have more. We're trying to turn and burn as fast as we get them. So thank you.
Great. Oh, one more question, Councilmember Allen.
Will this presentation be on the website or available somewhere?
Good question.
Great graphics. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.